She was my boss. Sharp, confident, untouchable. At least, that's what I thought. Until the night she took hold of my tie, pulled me close, and whispered, "Now look at me." I was 25 when I first started working under her. To everyone else in the office, she was simply the boss. Sharp, decisive, always one step ahead. People straightened their posture when she entered the room. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks, every step confident, every word measured. But from the beginning, I noticed things about her that no one else seemed to. The way she paused before answering a tough question, as if weighing more than just words. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral but steady, the kind that lingered even after she left the room. The way her eyes softened when she listened, even though her face rarely betrayed anything else. I respected her authority, of course, but respect wasn't the only thing I felt. There was something magnetic about her, though I buried it beneath professionalism. She was older, established, a woman who carried herself like she'd weathered storms and come out stronger. And me? I was still proving myself, still learning to carry the weight of responsibility. The first time she gave me feedback, she stood close enough to point at my laptop screen. Her hand hovered near my shoulder, never touching, yet I felt the ghost of warmth as though she had. "You're thorough," she said, her voice low and even. "But don't overthink. Trust your instinct." I nodded, but inside, her words struck deeper than she knew. It wasn't just advice for work. It felt like she was speaking into the marrow of who I was. Day by day, I became more aware of her presence. How her laugh, rare, quiet, seemed like sunlight cutting through a gray sky. How her posture remained steady even when the team was frazzled. How sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her expression carried something else. A stillness, a loneliness. I couldn't name it then, but I felt it. She wasn't untouchable, not really. She was human, carrying burdens no one else dared to ask about. Still, the line was clear. She was my boss, and I told myself that was all she could ever be. But late at night, when I'd catch myself replaying the sound of her voice, or the way her eyes lingered on me during a meeting, I knew the truth. Something unspoken was already moving between us. A silent current, pull I couldn't explain. And though neither of us had said a word, I could feel it building, waiting for the moment it would no longer be ignored. Most people dreaded staying late at the office, but that night I didn't mind. The building was quieter after everyone had gone, stripped of its usual noise and bustle. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence, and the fluorescent lights seemed softer, almost intimate. She was still there, of course, my boss. Her desk lamp glowed against the polished surface, casting shadows across her papers. She looked different without the room full of people hanging on her words. Lighter, somehow, though the weight of responsibility still rested in her posture. We were finishing a project that needed to be sent out before midnight. She worked with her blazer draped over the back of her chair, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, revealing graceful wrists that moved quickly across the keyboard. Now and then, she'd tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I caught myself staring before forcing my eyes back to my screen. It didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like sharing a secret space with her, this rare version of her that no one else got to see. At one point, I fumbled a stack of papers, sending them sliding across the floor. I muttered an apology and dropped to gather them. To my surprise, she joined me, kneeling beside me on the carpet. Her perfume surrounded me again. Subtle, steady, grounding. Our hands moved toward the same page, and when our fingers brushed, the moment seemed to stop. Her hand lingered, just barely, just long enough for me to notice. Then she pulled back, smoothing the page with a quiet "here." I thanked her, but the word came out softer than I meant, almost reverent. We stood up together, closer than usual. For a moment, I thought she might step back, reestablish the professional space between us. But she didn't. She simply looked at me, steady, searching, as though she was about to say something. Then, with the faintest smile, she returned to her desk. The rest of the night, the silence between us was different. Not empty, alive. I could feel her presence in every small movement. The way her pen tapped, the way she exhaled when she solved a problem. And though nothing was said, something had shifted. By the time we finally sent the project out, it was past 11. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered, "Finally!" I laughed quietly, and she opened her eyes, tilting her head at me with a look I couldn't quite read. "Good work tonight," she said, her voice softer than usual. And as we packed up to leave, I realized I wasn't just tired. I was restless. The night had carved a space between us, a closeness that hadn't existed before. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the wall first cracked. Not in some dramatic way, no grand confession or heated argument, but in a quiet moment that could have slipped by unnoticed if I hadn't been paying attention. We were taking a short break in the lounge area outside the conference room. The day had been long, filled with deadlines and endless revisions. She leaned against the counter, holding her coffee cup in both hands, staring at the steam as if her thoughts were far away. Usually, she was impossible to read. The boss, the woman who walked into a room and immediately owned it. But that afternoon, something in her posture was different. Her shoulders weren't as straight. Her eyes weren't as sharp. She looked tired. Not in the physical sense, but in a way that went deeper. I didn't want to intrude, but before I could stop myself, I asked softly, "Are you all right?" She blinked, surprised, and for a moment I regretted speaking. But then she exhaled, the kind of breath you release when you've been holding too much inside. "You know," she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, "people think that being in charge means you have everything figured out, that you don't get to feel uncertain or lonely. But the truth is," she hesitated, her voice dipping quieter, "the truth is it can feel isolating. Everyone looks to you for answers, but no one asks if you're okay." Her words hung in the air, heavy but honest. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just listened, and maybe that's what she needed most. Not advice, not solutions, just someone willing to hear her without judgment. When she finally looked up, her eyes met mine. There was something unguarded there, something I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. "Sorry," she said quickly, straightening as if to erase what she'd just revealed. "That was unprofessional of me." I shook my head. No, it wasn't. It was human. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes still carried a trace of hesitation. "You're different," she murmured, almost to herself. Then louder, "Thank you for listening." She touched my arm briefly, a light graze of her fingertips as she moved past me to return to work. It was nothing, really, just a moment. But to me, it felt like a door opening, even if just a crack. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop replaying that look in her eyes, the softness behind the strength, the quiet confession that she wasn't untouchable after all. And somewhere inside me, the thought I'd been trying to bury grew louder. She wasn't just my boss. She was a woman who sometimes felt alone. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to be the one who made her feel less so. The morning of the presentation, I could feel my nerves buzzing beneath my skin. It was a big pitch, one that could make or break months of work. I stood in the conference room, adjusting my tie in the reflection of the glass wall. But no matter how many times I tightened the knot, it still looked crooked. She noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed everything. "Hold still," she said, stepping toward me. Her voice was calm, but there was something in her tone I couldn't quite place. Something softer. Before I could respond, her hand was on my chest, steadying me, and then she reached for my tie. The world seemed to narrow in that instant. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric as her fingers worked the knot, the warmth of her presence pressing closer than it had ever been. Her perfume, faintly floral, familiar, drifted between us, grounding me and undoing me all at once. I tried to focus on my breathing, but it felt impossible when her hand brushed lightly against my collar, her touch so deliberate yet unhurried. "There," she murmured, tugging the fabric into place. But instead of letting go, she held onto the tie. Not tightly, just enough to remind me she had it. enough to remind me I was tethered to her in that moment. Then she looked up at me, her eyes locking onto mine. Firm. Unwavering. Now look at me. It wasn't a request. It was a command, but not the kind that belonged to boardrooms or offices. This one was intimate, almost protective. I did as she asked. I looked at her, and in that silence, everything unspoken between us rose to the surface. The air seemed thicker, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the presentation. My heart pounded, not from nerves about work, but from the nearness of her. The woman I'd been trying not to want. The woman who was now holding me by the tie and asking me to see her fully. For a few suspended seconds, neither of us moved. Her gaze didn't waver. There was no smirk, no teasing smile. Just quiet intensity. A question without words. Finally, she released the tie, smoothing it against my chest with one last brush of her hand. Her fingers lingered for the briefest heartbeat before retreating. "You'll do fine," she said, her tone back to professional. But her eyes told a different story. I swallowed hard, forcing a steady breath. "Thank you," I managed, though the word felt too small for what had just passed between us. She stepped back, but the space she left behind still burned with the ghost of her touch. And as I walked into that presentation, I realized something had changed forever. A line had been crossed, not in action, but in meaning. She wasn't just my boss anymore. She was the woman who told me to look at her, and I couldn't imagine looking away. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The way she held my tie, the weight of her eyes on mine, the command in her voice that wasn't really about the tie at all. I kept asking myself, had I imagined it? Had I read something into her actions that wasn't there? Or had there truly been a spark, something alive and unspoken in the space between us? The truth was, I felt it too strongly to dismiss. The problem was what it meant. She was my boss, a woman who had spent years building her reputation, her authority, her respect. And I was young, still carving out my place in the world. If anyone found out, if anyone even suspected, it wouldn't just complicate things, could undo everything. And yet, the memory of her touch refused to leave me. I could still feel the ghost of her fingers against my chest, the warmth of her standing close enough to hear her breath. My body remembered it even when my mind tried to reason it away. The next day at work, she was the picture of professionalism again. Calm, composed, unflinching. She didn't mention the tie, didn't let a single glance linger longer than necessary. If anything, she seemed more careful around me. But that carefulness, it was telling. It was the kind of restraint that only exists when something needs holding back. More than once, I caught her eyes flicking toward me in meetings, quick and precise, like she was checking to see if I was watching her. And every time, my chest tightened with a mix of longing and confusion. I wanted to say something, to ask her outright what that moment had meant. But I also knew what it could cost her if I did. If she denied it, I'd look like a fool. If she admitted it, then what? The questions circled endlessly in my mind. I thought of the way people in the office admired her, the respect she commanded. What would they think if they knew she'd held me by the tie and told me to look at her? Would they whisper? Would they assume the worst? And what about her? She had years of experience, a career built brick by brick. She didn't deserve to have that questioned because of me. So I said nothing. I buried it, even as it pressed against me with every passing hour. But silence didn't erase the truth. It only made it louder. And deep down, I knew she was struggling too. Because when her eyes met mine, just for a heartbeat too long, there was something there. A flicker she couldn't quite hide. It wasn't just me. We were both caught in the same storm, both pretending nothing had changed, but knowing without question that everything had. It was another late night, the kind where the office felt less like a workplace and more like a sanctuary. Most of the building was dark, the hum of the vending machine echoing faintly in the hallway. She and I were the only ones left, finishing up loose ends before tomorrow's meeting. The hours had stretched long, and with them, the silence between us had grown heavy. so heavy it felt like words had been waiting at the edge of my throat for days. She sat at her desk, reviewing a report, her hair slightly tousled from running her hand through it one too many times. There was something about seeing her like that, unpolished, almost weary, that made her seem more real, more reachable. When she looked up and caught me watching her, I knew I couldn't hold it back any longer. "Can I ask you something?" My voice sounded quieter than I intended, like I was afraid of breaking the spell of the room. Her eyes studied me carefully, as if weighing whether she wanted to hear whatever was coming. "Go ahead." I swallowed hard. "That moment with the tie, did it mean something to you? Because it did to me, and I can't keep pretending it didn't." The air seemed to stop moving. For a second, she said nothing, just looked at me, steady, searching, like she had that morning when she told me to look at her. Finally, she set her papers down and leaned back in her chair, letting out a long, quiet breath. "You don't make this easy, do you?" "I don't mean to make anything harder for you," I said quickly, "but I can't ignore it. I feel drawn to you, more than I should, and I don't know what to do with that." Her lips curved into a small, almost sad smile. "You think I don't feel it too?" The honesty in her voice hit me like a wave. She stood, crossing the space between us slowly, as if each step carried weight. When she stopped in front of me, she hesitated. Then, with a quiet kind of bravery, she reached out and brushed her fingers lightly against my sleeve. It was the gentlest touch, almost nothing. But I covered her hand with mine, holding it there, as if anchoring us both in the reality of what we were finally admitting. Her eyes softened. "You make me forget the rules I've built for myself, and that terrifies me. I don't want to ruin anything for you," I whispered. "But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let her hand rest beneath mine, the silence between us saying more than words ever could. And in that moment we both knew. The line we'd been dancing around for so long was no longer just in our heads. It was real, and it was fragile, and it was ours. We left the office later than usual that night, long past the point when even the cleaning crew had gone home. The streets outside were quiet, washed in the glow of streetlights and the faint shimmer of neon from a diner across the block. She walked beside me, her coat draped loosely around her shoulders. For once, she didn't stride with her usual precision. Her steps were slower, almost hesitant, like she was carrying thoughts too heavy to put into words. At her car, she paused. Neither of us reached for the door. We just stood there, the silence stretching again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, weighted with everything we'd admitted and everything we still hadn't. "I shouldn't feel this way," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I've told myself that 100 times. But when I'm with you—" She stopped, searching for the right words, her breath curling in the night air. "When I'm with you, I don't feel like the boss. I don't feel like I have to hold the world together. I just feel alive." Her honesty undid me. I stepped closer, close enough that the city noise seemed to fade, close enough to see the faintest tremor in her composure. "Then don't fight it," I said quietly. "We don't have to know what the future looks like. We just have to stop pretending this isn't real." Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, the world stilled. Then she reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair back from my forehead. An intimate gesture so small, yet it felt like the most important touch of my life. Her hand lingered, and before I could speak, she leaned in and pressed her lips gently to my cheek. It wasn't a kiss meant to claim or promise. It was tender, careful, almost trembling with restraint. But it carried more meaning than any words could. When she pulled back, she whispered, "One step at a time." I nodded because she was right. We didn't need to label it or define it under the cold light of rules and titles. What mattered was that something had shifted between us, something undeniable. She smiled faintly, that rare, almost secret smile I'd only seen a handful of times. And when she finally got into her car, I stayed there on the sidewalk, watching her taillights disappear down the street, my chest alive with a warmth I couldn't name. Later, as I lay in bed, I thought about that moment when she'd held my tie and told me to look at her. I realized she wasn't just commanding my attention. She was asking me to truly see her, not as my boss, not as the untouchable woman in charge, but as herself. And now, no matter what came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never look away again. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like. It helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more slow burn romances like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next story. And in the comments, tell me, what moment in this story made your heart race the most?